Good evening, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. This is interesting for me for a couple of reasons. I love talking, and I'll preface anything I say by I'm not an expert, or I don't consider myself to be the foremost expert on any of the subjects I lecture on. I like talking. I'm an information nut, and I love collecting information. But I do like to master things to the point where I can at least field all the questions and feel comfortable talking about them. So, but this is something that I've always loved doing. And the other thing that's interesting here is that my own club is about to start hybrid meetings themselves. So that should be interesting. And that's OMARC out of Kingston and Woodstock, the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club. So let's move ahead here. So why do we build? Building kits has been around since the beginning of ham radio. The first ham that I knew was when I was a little kid, W1PVC, Erwin Bruntill. And he was my uncle. He was my mother's oldest brother. And as she said, they grew up during the Depression. When she was a little girl, she remembered that Win had a radio in the corner of the living room that he had built himself. He was a fascinating guy. He has patents that you can look up with a couple of companies, RF patents. He was in the Merchant Marine, and I used to hang out in his shack in Norwalk, Connecticut. And like I said, he wasn't, I'd say, the most exciting person in the world, but he was definitely fascinating and interesting. And I learned a bit from him. Building our own stuff is fun, and it's satisfying. Whether you're building radios or building boats, it doesn't really matter. When you get to the end and what you've built works and it's something you can use and people compliment you on it, it's a very satisfying feeling. When you're building, the end result is under your control, especially if you're one of those people who, like, when you work in the kitchen, you start with a recipe, but you end up with something nowhere near what it was supposed to be. You can modify things as you go along or read up on modifications that other people have done. There's a certain amount of legacy to building. You can build something that doesn't exist anymore as a new product. There's quite a bit of that out there. And as I said, ham started with homebrew. I got very frustrated. I spent about 12 years living on Long Island before we moved back up here to the Hudson Valley. And I got very involved in a transmitter hunting group. And I made my own fox hunt transmitter using a little Baofeng 3-watt radio, one of their tiny ones, an Arduino board and some cabling and some batteries. And he was saying, well, what you built is essentially the same as and he gave me some brand and model. And I said, okay. And he said, well, why don't you just buy that? Wouldn't that be easier? I'm like, well, you really don't get it, do you? And it kind of amazed me that there were hams that have that attitude, but I guess some of us are out-of-the-box plug-and-play people. That's okay. But I prefer to tinker. There's very few things I have that are in their original state. So, little history. Some of it came up already, but I've been in the IT business for about 25 years. I was in professional dental sales before that. My title means nothing. So I call myself a special systems engineer for the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And basically what that means is I fix and spec out and handle the machines that nobody else will touch. Anything that's too non-standard for the regular repair crews comes to me. So it's a fun job, and there's always something interesting every day. I started playing with radios at the age of 7. I was a shortwave listener all those years until I got my license. But when I was a kid, I was building kits from Radio Shack. We had one Heathkit kit. I had a good friend of my brother's, older brothers, taught me how to solder and helped me out of a couple of jams when I got stuck. When I became a ham, I returned to kit building around 2012. And I went online. The internet didn't exist when I was a kid. I figured, well, there's probably a web page somewhere that lists every radio kit that I can buy. And there wasn't. There were some that tried, but they were grossly out of date or missing some important things. So I created my own, and that's how all this started. There's one of the kits I built as a kid. Radio Shack P-Box 3-transistor shortwave radio. And I have another one here. I bought an assembled one about 5 years ago off of eBay, just because I wanted to have one around. I don't know where the original one went. Mom probably sold it in a garage sale at some point. Here's some examples of vintage kits that kind of got the industry going for hams. The Night Kit AM transmitter. This was a huge deal. They sold tons of these things. The Radio Shack Globe Patrol regenerative shortwave receiver. I built one of these, and it actually worked. I had to have my the same friend of my brother's help me out of a jam when I had a soldering disaster on the band switch, but he did help me get it working. Heathkit DX60B. I had one of these. I did not build it, but we got a lot of novices going in the day. Very popular transmitter. So let's talk about the different types of building. We're going to start with through-hole soldering. And it's basically exactly what it says. You push a part through the holes from one side and you solder it on the other side. I've been told, that people took classes in this. You can teach somebody how to solder. You definitely can. But I think it's like a lot of other things that require a certain art technique. You're going to fall into your own style. Nobody can tell you you're doing this wrong unless everything you build fails. People do all this differently. So you can learn the basic way of doing it and get some basic pointers from people, but don't let anybody tell you you're doing it wrong if the end result works. And you don't burn anything down in the process. These graphics, some of them are a little slow. Surface mount. Once again, the name tells you what's going on. You're laying a part on pads on the surface of a board and flowing solder to basically glue the part onto the pad so that it's conductive to the pad. For those little capacitors, and I believe that's a small resistor on the bottom on the left, not too hard to do 0805 or 0603 gauge parts with a good set of magnifiers. You can do these. You can do them by hand. You don't need a hot air gun or a toaster oven. You can do these by hand. I don't have the steadiest hands in the world, trust me, and I don't have the best eyes. And I have put surface mount stuff together. You just need good magnifiers and a good technique to steady your hands and get this done. For the chips, a good friend of mine who does a lot of this taught me how to surface mount solder chips. He gave me a couple of neat techniques. I'm working on a vintage kit by Steven Weber, it's come out pretty good. I only had one solder bridge on one of the chips, which I cleaned up with some braid. In fact, I got the whole thing together and realized there was one chip missing. I bought this thing off of eBay, and the missing chip is unfortunately the programmed pick chip that makes the thing work. So I emailed Steven, and this is one of the reasons why I just love this hobby. And he emailed me back, and he said, I think I have some of those around somewhere. And it took months. And he said to keep bothering him, because I said, I don't want to bother you. You're not making money off of this. And he said, keep bothering me. I will get you that chip. And it came in the mail today. He finally did it. I told him I owe him lunch when I get up that way. So, hell of a nice guy. He always responds. He always helps people who are building his stuff. Manhattan with me pads. This is cool. I've done this in my maker's class. These are pads you can buy from a couple of sources, but the one we talk about here is QRP Me, Rex Harper's company. You get basically a wafer of these little square pads that you can break apart. You can get different sizes, and you glue them down to a copper board. So they create a little insulated island that you can solder things to. What's neat when you're building with me pads is that you can build out in the shape of your schematic. So it's a cool way to build. And it is a much more attractive way of building than this one. Dead bug. Dead bug building is named as such because you put the ICs upside down and glue them to the board and solder off of the leads from there. And it's called dead bug because it looks like a dead bug laying upside down with its legs sticking up in the air. Breadboard construction. Lots of this out there. What's really funny is, if you're a technician in some sort of professional environment like I am, and you open up a device that someone paid $1 million for, and you find one of the boards looks like this, that's always a real trip, but it happens. But, definitely plenty of things have been built on this. And if you're going to build that way, there's the solderless breadboard. Great for prototyping. You push the parts in. I actually did a whole class on this last year, talking about how these work, which of the pins are connected, which aren't. And it led to 2 other products, which I don't have pictures of here, but I'll mention. One is, which a lot of you know, you can get a circuit board in the same layout as your solderless breadboard with the same pins connected in the same patterns. So you can just transfer a project from one of these onto a soldered breadboard in the same pattern. Really easy to make something more permanent. Because not every project lends itself well to this type of construction. You move something the wrong way or stare at it funny and you start getting a hum or feedback. But if you know it's going to work, you've gotten it to work, you can move it to a permanent board. The other one, which I'm starting to see more of, is solderless breadboards with things embedded in them. And one of them is, there's one that has a microcontroller embedded in it. There's an Arduino board inside of the breadboard and LEDs and other power features. It's really cool for microprocessor controlled projects. Pittsburgh construction. Now, this is not widely used, but it's used among the kits from the 4-state QRP club. Pittsburgh construction is kind of like a cross between surface mount, Manhattan, and through-hole. It offers some interesting construction advantages. So you're basically gluing through-hole parts with solder down to pads, like surface mount pads. The way they make these boards, they're multi-layer boards, and usually any radio or accessory that's designed with this type of construction, the other side of the board is labeled and has your controls on it. So there's a couple of radios like this, where like this one with the Ozark Patrol, the other side of this board has the tuning control, the fine tuning control, the band switch, and any of the display, LEDs, whatever. So there's a few nice kits like this, and more of these kits are coming with circuit board material housings, where you solder together the housing from pieces of circuit board. Well, it's kind of neat if one of those boards has all the circuits in them as well. Makes for a really clean construction. Let's talk about tools a little bit. Here's you got to have one of these. I have a few different test meters around. I have an old analog one because you do need those for certain things sometimes, that you don't want the meter blowing all over the place. Sometimes you just need an average reading on something. This is the meter I own. It's I also have a Fluke bench meter though, which I picked up at a yard sale of all places. But this is the one I use the most, and it came from, of all places, Harbor Freight. They do have a couple of things they make that are decent. This was one of their better meters, and it's been pretty good. I really have no complaints on it. So I don't buy a lot from there. There's a nice set of pliers there. Alligator clip leads. I got to have 100 of these around. It's one of those things I buy every time I see them on sale somewhere. I have made antennas by stringing 20 of these together. I've done so much with these. That was the soldering iron I bought when I first got back into kit building in 2012. It's an adjustable heat copy of the Weller. It's a much less expensive, probably Chinese-made version. The one I bought, and you can buy it from many sources, but I got mine from Quicksilver. who shows up at a lot of the ham fests. He's the guy who sells the crimp kits and a lot of coax. Great retailer. This little gem here is from my dental days, and I like using this when I'm working with small stuff. The official name in the dental industry is called a 317 pliers, sometimes called a cotton pliers or college pliers. I have a link in the summary if you're looking for these, but it is a dental instrument. They come locking and non-locking. It's just great for fishing parts out of things, and the angled head can get in places that a lot of tweezers can't. There we go. Sophisticated piece of equipment for kit building, the egg crate. You can't go wrong sorting your parts into an egg crate. And what I usually like to do is put the smaller stuff or the less stuff that's easily self-identifiable into the cups, and the resistors get poked through the cardboard and stood up on end. And then I'll usually take a Sharpie and write the values next to each cluster of resistors. Another handicap that I build with, and was one of the reasons why I have a meter on the bench, I'm colorblind. I'm not severely colorblind, but enough that I always check my work. I don't trust my eyes with color codes unless they're fiercely obvious, but the reds, the browns, and the greens, and the grays sometimes really trip me up. So I always go through the resistors before I start building, and I separate them, and I either put them in an egg crate or I tape them down to a sheet of paper and write the value next to each cluster of the same. Cookie sheet. I did a build-a-thon for Long Island CW Club and Limark down on the island, and I bought like 30 of these at Dollar Tree. Once again, can't go wrong, but I have graduated to something more sophisticated. Tools, continuing. The Tiny SA, along with the Nano VNA, are low-cost, tiny versions of bench test equipment that have come out over the last few years. No, the Tiny SA at $60, $65, whatever you'll pay for the good one, is not a $2,000 spectrum analyzer. But the people who have tested this against the $2,000 spectrum analyzer will tell you it's worth a lot more than $60. It is a nice little piece of equipment. It's gotten me out of some jams already. So I recommend those. This thing here is a block of rubberized silicone that I got from, of all places, Radio Shack. Radio Shack still exists. They sell online. And if you drive out into the boonies, for you folks, if you head out I-88 into the middle of New York, there are a couple of Radio Shacks out there. They're usually like hardware stores or TV repair places or appliance shops that have continued as franchise operations. But Radio Shack solicited this to me on, of all places, Facebook as an ad. And it's a high heat piece of rubberized plastic. So it's soft. And you can stick things in here like RCA connectors and variable resistors. And it has some notches and things where you can put almost any part in it. Like it has two notches opposite each other where you can sit two wires so you can solder them together and not have to worry about burning your fingers, because you really do need 3 hands to do some of this. But yeah, the hot holder, a little pricier than I would want, but it's a very unique item. This is the soldering iron I'm using now. It's these big soldering stations. You can get them on Amazon or off of eBay. I think mine came off of eBay. There are some reports of out-of-the-box failure with these, as with any mass-produced product from China. Copies of industrial products that cost 10 times more. But the majority of them work great, and I have yet to have a problem with mine. And for the, I think, $80 I paid for it, it has a fully thermostatic controlled adjustable heat soldering iron with multiple tips. It takes the standard tips that all the other ones take. It has a hot air nozzle with different guides that you can snap on it. It has a bench power supply, adjustable voltage out, and a voltmeter. Definitely worth the investment. Here's more pliers. I put this on here because I picked up this batch at another yard sale. You go to these garage sales and yard sales, especially if you have a community that does one of those community yard sale days. And the guys who have the tools, sometimes you'll find a whole bag of pliers or something useful for, a couple of bucks. Can't hurt to have multiple shapes and sizes. That is almost the same as the head magnifier that I wear. I recommend these. Most of them are 3-stage magnifiers. Out of the box, you're looking through a basic magnification. There's another rectangular lens that flips down from the inside, which doubles the mag. And then you have the flip down monocle, which gives you really close-up magnification if you need it. And then most of them have a headlamp, which also helps. They're not overly expensive, but I recommend using one of those. This is what I'm using on the main workbench instead of the cookie sheet now. It's another high heat silicone, like rubberized plastic, like the hot holder. It's pretty good size here. You can see about 14 by 21 and a half. It has these little compartments, and a couple spots here are magnetic, so you can stick screws to them. It has this parts sorter that's in a matrix. And any of you who have ever taken apart something like a phone or a laptop know about screw sorting. Putting the screws down in a pattern so you know where they go back. That's kind of what this is for. But this thing's been great, and it'll survive, a hot solder blob. It doesn't burn. So what can we build? And this is where I started diving in to look at the business and see what was out there. And there is quite a bit. So the website I created is radiokitguide.com. I try to get it updated a couple of times a year. I did an update way back at the beginning of the year, and I've added a couple little things since then. But it's due for another update, and I think I'll probably get to that in the next month or so. Because things are always changing. So for you beginners, you want to start with something easy. Everybody builds a Pixie. There's a couple different sources for these, but most of them come from either eBay or AliExpress or Banggood. They sell these kits. You buy them you buy 10 at a time for like $3.50 a piece. They're incredibly cheap. They come with a 40-meter crystal. One of the negatives to the Chinese Pixie is that the crystal is in the extra part of the 40-meter CW band. So you can get other crystals. If you're not an extra, you can swap it out for something else. Is it tunable? We just did this in my maker's class because I got asked to do a basic kit again. It is tunable by about 1.2 kilohertz. That's about it. So you can pull it about a kilohertz. But yes, you can put different crystals in here. I recommend maybe putting a socket here so you can change the 40-meter crystal to something else. You can build it for other bands. There's tons of information online telling you the values for the chokes and caps that you need to swap out for other bands. There is a guy on the kit guide, Third Planet Solar, KC9ON. He has a website where he sells something called the Pixie Switch, which gets soldered on top of this board, and you can put multiple crystals on it and make a nice little switchable multi-frequency Pixie. So what's the deal with the Pixies? It's an easy build. It'll probably work. At least you hear signals on a night when the band is open and you have it hooked up to a good antenna. Why isn't it good? It's a terrible radio. It was basically an exercise in building a transceiver with very few parts, and they succeeded. But you have to have a really good ear with CW. You have to be one of those people who can work without filtering, because on a busy band you're going to hear 10, 12 signals at the same time. But you can. That's one of the neat things about this is it's so simple you can modify it. And that's the next stage I'm going into with the class, is we're going to start seeing what we can do to make it better. Maybe you're offering some better filtering or a little more output power. They don't put out much power, a few hundred milliwatts, that's it. But there's lots of stories of people having QSOs on these. You'll find other sources, and I have a couple in the kit guide that sell a slightly better version of the Pixie. There's one place where you can order it with different crystals. So, and there's certainly plenty of sources for crystals, but that other place also sells it on different bands, which is nice. But great out-of-the-door kit. And like I said, most of the time it works. Just, if it doesn't, check your parts because some of this stuff is not always top quality. This is the little squall from QRP-Me, Rex Harper. He took the Pixie design, reimagined it a bit, and made it more hackable. Everything is socketed. He has there's lots of information for modding these. He even recommends putting the transistors in sockets if you want to try and play with different transistors. You can operate this on different bands with modules, which is cool. So you can make modules with different crystals on them and order blank modules. And like all of Rex's kits, they come on a round circuit board and sit on top of a tuna fish can. And he gives you the can. He actually packages the kits in the can. You pull the top off and build the kit and then set it back on top of the can when you're done. Rex has a great sense of humor. The Splinter 2 from Breadboard Radio, a little more involved, but still a basic kit. And it has a lot of features. It's a side tone, a VXO, spotting feature, and a little built-in key right on the board. He sells it with a 40-meter crystal. I think you might get a choice of frequencies, but I'm not sure. But same thing, you can socket it and use it on different frequencies. He recently expanded to a whole line of kits. This is basically a separate transmitter and receiver on the same board. Intermediate. QCX Plus from QRP Labs. This is a lot of parts. So a lot of people question me putting it in the intermediate section. It's really not a hard build. It's just a lot of parts. And it's a good exercise in toroid winding. Don't be afraid of toroids. There's lots of techniques for winding them correctly. And if you're really nervous about it, you can go to kitsandparts.com and buy some extra magnet wire and extra cores so that you can practice a little bit. But it's intermediate because of the size of the board. There's lots of room to work on this one. And Hans's instructions are fantastic. He probably has one of the best manuals in the business at the moment. The Rockmite 2 from QRP-Me, Small Wonder Labs. This one's a little more difficult because of its size. You're working pretty close in here. And some of you might know the Rockmite originally developed by somebody named Dave Benson, K1SWL. Dave had a company called Small Wonder Labs, which he shut down a number of years ago and gave some of the designs to some other kit companies in the business. But he is famous for his projects and his designs, and he's still designing stuff for some of these other companies. But the Rockmite is kind of legendary. A rock-bound radio, hence the name, but there's lots of accessories available. It's available on multiple bands, has a built-in keyer. It's a good little radio. Advanced. And you notice there's another QCX in here. This is electrically the same radio as the QCX Plus, but it's the size of a pack of cards. And once again, I've been asked why I put this under advanced, because a good 60-65% of the parts are already installed when you buy the kit, because it's a surface mount board with the SMT parts preloaded. The reason why this is advanced is because it's so tiny. You have really almost no room to work in here. And once again, Hans and his instructions, I have to tell you, if you're going to build one of these, and it's a fun build, and I have one in my desk right here. Follow the instructions to the letter. Read the entire manual through completely. I know we've always been taught that, even as kids in school. Always read the instructions first. With this kit, I strongly recommend it. And then after you've read them through, when you build the kit, always read each step ahead and know exactly what you're doing. There's little stuff on here, like when you put down one of the trimmer pots on the board, there's little tiny plastic nubs on the bottom of the trimmer pot. Hans tells you to clip them off. If you don't clip them off, this thing won't go together. And we're talking about a millimeter of plastic or less. And there's lots of points in the manual where you have to do things like that to get it to line up perfectly. I hope if some of you venture to build one of these, that you're as impressed with the engineering that went into this as I am. They're amazing radios. Hans is a real class act. This is one that very few people in the States know about. EA3GCY has a whole line of kits. This is the DB4020. It's a dual band 40 and 20 meter sideband transceiver kit with a CW interface optional. He has a whole line of stuff. And his Eiler 40 is the kit that kind of got him out there. Has gotten rave reviews. Not much in this category anymore. Heathkit tried to come back, but we're kind of disappointed with their return. One kit that's still in this category, and what a fantastic radio, the K2 from Millicraft. I would love to build one of these. This is all through hole. It's definitely a long-term project. It'll take you a while to put this together, but they're fantastic radios. Even by today's standards, they still hold their own. But if you really want a long-term project, and you're one of those guys who built the 6-foot-long model of the USS Constitution when you were a teenager, like my brother did, you'll love this. Another one that I don't know what the current status of is, I think they're selling them again, is the DZ from Sienna Radio. Pretty high-end rig, not inexpensive either. But once again, rave reviews from the people who take the time to put one together. I'm going to breeze through some of these companies real quick that are out there. 4-state QRP. The one on the left is a limited kit called the Ozark 30. It's a surface mount transceiver, CW transceiver for 30 meters. The one on the right is one of the Crickets. It's an NM0S design, and you can always tell his stuff because of the etched inductors on the board. Really cool idea. So no toroids to wind, they're etched onto the board. Because of that, it's really hard to move it to another band, but his kits are inexpensive. This is the Nouveau 75, a QRP-ish radio for AM operators on 75 meters. The Hilltopper 40, and the Hilltopper comes in other bands now. I mentioned AliExpress and eBay a number of times. There's the Pixie. These next two, I'm not sure which is which, but one of them is called the Frogs Calling. Some of these are just poor translations of things that they read. Another one is the 49er. There's been a lot of projects that bounced off of the basic 49er radio, converting it in one case to a pretty sophisticated digitally tuned CW rig. So there's some neat projects out there for that. This is called the Rockmite, and there's different versions of it you'll find online. The Chinese version of the Rockmite has almost nothing in common with the original Dave Benson Rockmite. And the funniest thing that you'll see now if you go on eBay is there is now a digitally tuned PLL version of the Rockmite, which kind of negates the version of why it's called the Rockmite, because it was rockbound, but okay. You can buy a digital tuned Rockmite now. They work, but you can read reviews on these. But they're inexpensive. You can buy one of these with a professional case to put it into for less than $50 usually. Here's a little tuner kit. Pacific Antenna, QRPkits.com. This company used to be owned by Doug Hendricks, who's now with QRP Guys. He sold it to Pacific Antenna. They have a whole line of kits. A lot of them that come in really nice cases. Some of them not available currently, but I think more than half of them are. This KD1JV Survivor is an interesting 80-meter sideband transceiver. And there's the KD1JV Tribander. So these are Steve Weber radios. I have an unbuilt Tribander that I picked up, and it turned out to be a very early version. I emailed Steve and asked him what was different, and he explained what was different and sent me the proper instructions. Once again, what a great guy. Here's QRP ham radio kits, the Spanish kit maker. Here's some of his offerings. The one on the bottom that just loaded is a dual sideband kit, double sideband. A little controversial sometimes for use on the bands, but is a much easier phone transceiver to build than a true sideband one. But yes, you're actually putting out both upper and lower sideband when you build one of these. And he does have some cases for these as well. Not always in stock, but I have yet to build one of his. I have enough sitting here waiting to be built, but eventually I think I will grab one of his. MFJ sells some of their popular products as kits, and they have a couple things that are only kits. So the tuner up there, the Cub transceivers have been around forever. You can buy the regenerative shortwave receiver as a kit that they sell. And Vectronics, which is owned by MFJ, also sells kits, and they're pretty much, in many cases, the same radios that MFJ is selling, but they have some slightly different little transceiver kits. There's one. QRP Me, I mentioned. This is Rex Harper, the tuna can guy. There's the little squall we already talked about, and the rock mite. This is the Sudden Storm receiver. And the Super Tuna 2 transmitter, another one that you can do band modules with, which is nice. This is Two Tinned Tunas. This is a remake on the original tuna can transmitter from NorCal, but he has a version of this he calls the Easy Build. And when you look at it on his website, you'll see the parts are laid out. Just really simple, really easy to do. Rex does a lot of build-a-thons. He'll come to a club and do a build-a-thon for a larger group, and he does one at 4 Days in May every year, and he does one at his own event in Maine, LobsterCon. He always sells the kits that he's doing in these build-a-thons afterwards, so you can buy whatever it was if you didn't attend. Always cool stuff. I talked about these earlier. These are from the same guy, from QRP Me. These are the Me squares. These are Me pads. So you solder an integrated circuit to these and then glue them down and use them like a Me square. He even has them for tubes. Look at that. This one fits inside of an Altoids tin. And so does this one, which is more of a breadboard style, but really nice if you like to build things that size. Tony Parks, 5dash.com. Tony is known for the soft rock receivers and transceivers. Not everything is available currently. I've been meaning to send Tony an email to find out what's going on with him, because he announced a few years ago that he was getting out of the business and shutting down the company, and then it didn't happen. He's been selling even more. In fact, he's been selling a transceiver, but he only sells it pre-built, I guess, because the coils are so tricky. He's been selling a transceiver for those new medium and low frequency bands that we have, the 630 and 2200 meter bands. It currently says unavailable when you go to his website, but a lot of his other stuff is still available. So he makes multi-band software-defined radio transceivers and a lot of just receivers as well. But the cases here, unfortunately, are no longer available. But there's a picture of one of his. There's a little bit of surface mount work on these. I think when I first started building, I didn't do one because I was scared to death of it. But now that I've done some surface mount, I'd have no problem going back and doing one of these. Walford, this is a kit supplier from the UK. He always has interesting stuff. He publishes a newsletter every few months called Hot Iron, which you can get for free now. And he always has interesting names for all of his kits. He splits them into 3 categories: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Not everything here is still available. He changes it up about every 6 months, always coming up with new stuff. You do have to pay a little more shipping to get a kit from Walford for us, but well worth looking at. And he's a really nice guy. We were supposed to visit him when we were in England a couple of years ago, and unfortunately our schedule didn't allow, and he got busy when I did have time, so I didn't get to pop in on him. But he runs a farm out in the country in England and does the kit stuff on the side. Breadboard radio I mentioned earlier. The sawdust receiver, which is regenerative. The sawbuck receiver, which I think is direct conversion. This is one of his new radios, the Woodpecker 60. Those of you who want to operate on 60, it comes with a crystal for one of the 60-meter channels. He's working on a Woodpecker 40 that'll be switchable between 2 frequencies. The Splinter 2, which we talked about before, that's the transceiver. And this is the wood chip transmitter. Everything comes with a wooden base except for the Woodpecker. And then he encourages you to paint it and put the decals on and send him a picture when you're done. QRP guys. So this is a bunch of guys who are designing for other companies or had their own companies, and they got together and came up with QRP guys. This is their little SWR and power meter. I built one of these. It's over here on the shelf next to me. Great little kit. I think it works up to about 10 watts. And it has a little dummy load built in. The PacificCon, which isn't out yet, it's coming out in conjunction with the PacificCon convention. That's a CW and double sideband transceiver. This is their digital modes kit, multiband, with now with a digital synthesizer. So it is tunable. You can use it for different digital modes. Except I don't think it works for PSK31 because it can't replicate phase shift keying. And you get modules for 3 of the bands with it, and you can buy blank modules to do more. This is one of their antennas, and it's an antenna tuner, and the protrusions are so you can wrap your antenna wire around it when you're done. Great for QRP operation. They sell a whole line of these, all different ones. This is something new. This is a tri-band CW transceiver that just came out for the new Sunspot cycle, a 10, 12, and 15 meter CW transceiver. On the left is a VXO version, tri-band with a tuning knob. On the right is with it added with the same digital synthesized tuner as the digital kit. Here's a couple others that have popped up more recently. HF Signals is Asher Farhan from India. He designed the BitX transceivers, which were produced by a number of different kit makers. He decided to sell it on his own. He started a little company in India. It is staffed entirely by women who did not have employment before he hired them. So he's trying to give jobs to people who weren't working, and they assemble the boards. It's not really a true kit. In fact, the version 6 requires no soldering. It's like Legos. You're going to buy this thing, you're just going to snap it together and put it on the air. There's a lot of experimenting you can do with these and a lot of modifications. But the idea for about $230 or so of a 80 through 10 5 to 10 watt transceiver with a touch screen that'll work on sideband and CW and do digital modes with an interface. I mean, it's a neat radio to play with. I have several different versions of it, including this one. And the newest firmware modifications and updates really turn it into a nice radio. We're going to talk about Ashar again right when we close out here. W. Rossi, this is a new guy. You'll find his stuff on eBay. This is the half pint transceiver, I guess, that he designed. They're inexpensive, pretty easy build, and he gives you the pins for doing the crystal socket, which is nice. Another couple new ones. Midway. This is the guy who got the SW designs from Small Wonder. So the SW40 is now the ME40, the SW20, the ME20. They're slightly modified versions of the original Dave Benson radios, modified mostly for parts availability. That's one of the reasons why kits disappear sometimes, is parts disappear and you can't get things that you designed your radio around sometimes. So he's kept this one up to date. I know he's planning on someday doing some more. I got to meet him in person when we were traveling down south. He's on the I-81 corridor through Virginia, which a lot of us travel periodically to go various places. Look him up. He has a storefront, and you can actually go in there and buy stuff from him. Pentec, WA3RNC. I don't know much about these radios, but they're new. This is the dual band one, and I believe he had a tri-bander coming out as well. And his whole point with these radios was back to knobs, no menus. Okay, that's fine. I know he's trying to keep things more simple, but he's got to still have some kind of menuing in here if it's got a digital readout, because I don't see all of the functions there. But neat stuff, though, and I think somebody reviewed it recently, and it looked pretty good. Midnight Design. Everybody say a prayer for this radio. Unfortunately, the phaser, which is the one on the left, is no longer produced. Dave Benson designed this for Midnight Design. It was one of the first true sideband digital mode kits to come out. There's other stuff that's come out now, but it's a great radio to build. You can get a nice looking professional case for it, but unfortunately, they said they can't get some of the parts anymore and they've discontinued it. On the right is the SDR Cube. These are hard to get, but he's still doing them. And now that he's not making the phaser anymore, he can concentrate more on getting these back up to speed. This is a Tony Parks soft rock board inside of a case with a microcomputer board and a display and everything, turning it into a completely self-contained, standalone software-defined transceiver. So you can buy it in various levels of deconstruction for putting together. He sells it mostly assembled most of the time, but you can build parts of it. He uses a custom version of the soft rock. So you can't buy a soft rock from Tony and put it in this. You have to have an older soft rock to make it work. There's some accessories. That's the Cycle 24 converter. It'll convert a CB radio to receive shortwave or specific ham bands. This is the Clifford Wareham Easy Digi. These are digital interfaces for doing digital modes. They isolate your audio. And he has more sophisticated ones with USB and all different levels of them. Fox Delta has a whole line of unique kits, including this USB analyzer. The ZM2 is one of the only things you can still buy from that company, MTech. This is a legendary QRP tuner. It'll tune a file cabinet. It is a great tuner. It has the little light on it, which you peak your tune till the light goes out. You can buy it as a kit, assembled, or with BNC or SO239s, either way. I have one. Even with a lot of my automated stuff, I still love using this thing. So it's a great little tuner. Here's another digital interface, this one from Unified Microsystems. This is something else from Asher Farhan, HF Signals, the Antuino. It's a test bed, basically a signal generator and some other test equipment all loaded into one. The Hard Rock 50. This is a 50-watt amp that you build that is designed to work with the KX3 and some other transceivers. It'll work with anything, but it's set up for those. You can buy different attenuator boards for it depending on what you're driving it with. But great stuff. It always reviews well. And this company sells a bunch of other interesting things that aren't really kits, but can be the centerpiece of a project. Worth looking at. White Rock mini paddles from Electronic USA. They have a few other things, but yeah, you put these together. Neat little mini paddles. These are websites I'm just bringing up real quick. This is Dan's Electronics. He sells a lot of components and some kits, but mostly just components. Great source for stuff if you're a kit builder. Terrible web page. Looks like it popped up on my 286 computer in 1987. These two came up together here. Electronics USA. Another one, you see all the mini paddles. Kitsandparts.com. The Toroid King. Diz. He does sell kits sometimes. His current radio he's selling is called the Organic 5-Watter. Why is it organic? Because he saw that word on everything when he went to the store, so he put it on his radio. But he sells supplies. So, like I said, this is the guy, when you ruin your toroids, you can buy the cores from him, the wire. He has toroid guides on this website, charts showing you how to convert. Like, if you had to switch from one core to another, how you change the turns from one to the other. Also a calculator, so you can figure out how much magnet wire to cut for 30 turns on a T5, Great site. Mini kits from Australia. This guy has a lot of cool stuff. You got to pay shipping from Australia, but a lot of neat accessories. And soda beams. Soda beams also. And one of the things he's been selling are these little tiny filter boards and things like that you can mount inside of a transceiver that you built. To add a little DSP to it. At the top of Radio Kit Guide, when you go there, you'll see a mention of this and a link to it. It's another page I put together. A lot of us love these companies. All Electronics, Marlin P. Jones, Electronics Goldmine. These companies are still out there. A lot of them are gone. I went out to California a number of years ago, and I got to visit Weird Stuff Warehouse and Halted Supply. They're both gone now. But I am lucky, and you folks don't live very far from me. If you've never been, Kingston, New York still has a surplus store. It's not like these, but it's well worth a visit. It's called P&T Surplus. That's Papa Tango, P&T. It's down on the creek in the lower part of Kingston. It's open Monday through Saturday during the day. I don't know how much longer they're going to be there. The owner, I don't know how much longer he's going to keep with it, but he's basically a scrapyard junk shop and just buys and sells anything. I have bought anything there, from fabric for my wife to an unbuilt Dave Benson kit that I found, to bags of components, to an HRO 60, a national HRO 60 once that he had sitting there. You never know. But yeah, make the pilgrimage down to Kingston and go to P&T if you never have. But you'll see this listed on Radio Kit Guide. There's another page where I list all of the surplus outlets that are still in existence. And to close out, I just added these slides today. On the horizon, these are things that I'm very excited about because they're changing the technology. Hans Summers from QRP Labs is designing a radio called the QSX. He keeps telling us it will eventually come out, but he's not going to give us a date. And he surprised us with the other radio here. So, it could be next week, it could be next year. But in its fully built out form will be a multi-band software-defined radio-based transceiver. And for a preview of the technology, he released the QDX down below there, which is about the size of a Raspberry Pi, that board. And this is a multi-band, 4-band digital mode radio doing true sideband FT8, but just like the other one I mentioned before, can't do PSK31, although Hans says he's working on it and he thinks he might be able to come up with an algorithm that'll allow PSK31. So it can do other modes. It is a true SDR-based radio. It is fully USB connected to a computer. That's how it operates. Only one connection. So it's got a sound card in it, built in, and the cat control serial interface. So like if those of you have IC7300s or radios like that, it's a single USB connection to your computer and everything will work. You can also switch it to feed an I and Q signal through the USB into your computer and use it with SDR software just as a receiver. There's going to be so many things built off of this. The other things Hans has done, which have really changed this type of kit, is the microprocessor in this thing. You can load up a terminal mode in your computer. So basically you load up PuTTY or HyperTerm or some basic terminal software, hit enter, and you get a menu. And you can go into all the configurations and the setups and the tweaking and test modes. There's all kinds of test modes and test equipment, all menu driven from inside of the radio. The firmware updates also, usually on radios like this, are a pain in the neck. Some of them, like the Steve Weber one I'm working on, where you have to pop the chip out and use a PIC programmer. Nope. Hans has set this up so that when you go into the firmware update section of the menu, it loads a section of memory that'll appear to your computer like a USB drive. You put the firmware file on that and hit commit, and it'll load the firmware in for you. I want to see more stuff like this. But yeah, so the QSX, this will be a multi-band radio, all modes that you can build for way less than $200, probably in the low hundreds. We can't wait. And Asher Farhan from India is working on the SBitX, which is also an SDR radio. So it's an SDR-based reimagining of his BitX. It's using a Raspberry Pi as the computer, and those of you who do this stuff like I do are saying, wait, the Raspberry Pi uses a lot of power. That's not going to be very efficient. No, it's not. But as far as I know, it's also going to be a 50-watt radio. He's not designing this for summits on the air. This is a rig you can put in your shack and use. And this is a very early rendition of it. It should be interesting. And like with all of Asher's stuff, after it's released, people will start writing custom firmware for it and all sorts of stuff, and it'll get very interesting. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope your workbench doesn't look like this, but sometimes things go wrong. You can email me with questions, and that's my email address, neil@neilgoldstein.com. This presentation, there's a link to it, and links to things I talked about are at fofio.blogspot.com. And if you want to know what a Fofio is, there's a link that explains that as well. And radiokitguide.com, which I mentioned a couple of times. Yeah, you'll see a couple of ads loaded on the top of radiokitguide.com. I think I've earned $100 off of the webpage in 11 years. So it's not there for me to make a buck, but when you do stuff in the forum, the form that I'm doing it, the ads actually do add to the visual effects. So anyway, we can do some questions, and
if you can hear us from here, Neil.
Yeah. I caught the beginning of it, but it filtered it out as noise. Zoom is funny with that.
When the clapping goes, there's a filter that completely shuts the audio down.
I learned, actually, this past week, I did an FT8 presentation. That's the other one I do a lot. And I learned the hard way that you can't play FT8 audio over Zoom. It just assumes it's feedback and cuts it right out.
Sure. Well, we can do questions from the Zoom audience, or or both. I mean, so maybe from the Zoom audience first, and then the folks here at the fire station can either come up to the mic or ask a question, and I will try to repeat it. But we'll get through this. So,
Yeah, if anybody remote would like to speak, just unmute your microphone and ask away.
I'm watching the chat too, so you can always pop something in there if you want.
Right. Well, Jim, why don't you, oh, it looks like Ken is.
Yeah, can you hear me, Neil?
Yes.
Ken, K2UYK. I started out with this stuff back in the late 50s and early 60s. Ted Crosby, W6TC, ran a wonderful article in QST with his homebrew radios, his tube radios. These were communications receivers that were extremely well. So I got bitten by the bug and built one from scratch, drilling all the tube socket holes in the aluminum and doing the panel work and everything. And I find that I had to stop building because the family came along and took a lot of time away. But you've scratched the bug again, I think. And I find this very interesting. There was a fellow here in Schenectady, I can't remember his call, Bill Mankiewicz. I believe he's down in South Carolina, and I believe he sells QRP rigs, but I can't remember the name of his small company. So I'm really surprised to see the amount of equipment that's out and about these days. It looks overwhelming, actually, to see such an interest in this. And I commend you. This was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yeah, I understand the time factor. I have bit off a little more than I can chew lately, especially with the makers class I do for LICW. Oh, shameless plug for LICW. If anybody doesn't know what that is, the Long Island CW Club has over 2,000 members now.
Wow.
And I recommend checking them out. If you just want to polish your CW, get a little faster, or if you never sat down and learned, like I hadn't, they're a fantastic group, and they offer a lot more than just CW classes. Like every Wednesday night, my makers class. But there's a lot of stuff like that.
that's right up Ken's alley.
Yeah, right up my alley, all right. And Joe's, too.
Great bunch
Very
of people.
nice, thank you.
But yeah, I get you. My youngest is 22, and she's the only one still home with us. My son, my middle son, Jill and I have 6 between us, and she's also a ham, by the way. But my middle son just got his license, so we're going to be hearing him on the air now.
That's marvelous.
I thought you might enjoy a little trip down memory lane to take a look at sort of our roots. For most of us, Heathkit was where we started out. And I'll just give you a quick tour of the Heathkits, sort of going back into history. I think it's quite interesting to look at the history of Heathkit. Did you know that Ed Heath started out building airplanes rather than radio equipment? There's a picture of him up there with his airplane in 1900. In 1926, he introduced the airplane as a kit. So he got an early start on kit building. In 31, he was killed in his airplane. So not very successful. 35, his engineer, Howard Anthony, bought the Heathkit company. 45, after World War II, Anthony bought a load of war surplus parts, and Heathkit used those parts for many of their kits early on. 47 on. And so that's where the Heathkit company sort of began. Their first product was an oscilloscope, the 01. And give you a very quick look inside the factory. This is their order department. probably back in the 50s. This is their shipping department. And perhaps the most important thing and the most unique thing about Heathkit was that if you built one, you could send it to them and they would make it work, even if you had totally fouled up your soldering. So here's their customer service department and the actual service department. There were guys who sat there and fixed horribly destroyed Heathkits and made them work for people. I just thought you might enjoy a quick look at that as a quick look.
And just a quick plug, if anyone wants one of those OM1 or very similar, I don't know if it's the OM1 scope, but Tim Long has one and is actually in my garage right now. I don't know really if it works or not, but the price is right. I could have put it in the car, but the car was already loaded with stuff that you'll see on the free table. But they're out there. They are out there. And it's, at the very least, it's a great conversation piece. So,
I acquired about 2 weeks ago an HW 5400. The last radio Heathkit designed as a kit before they made the copy of the Yaesu. Well, they weren't making it; Yaesu was making it, but. Recent acquisition, and I did have it fully vetted and tested out down at Hamfest yesterday, and it appears to be working well. So I don't know. I'm going to try to get it on the air, but my point here is that I'm familiar with Heathkit, and I'm very disappointed with their return. They're in business. You can go to their website. You can buy a kit from them, but the kits they're selling are, in most cases, a far cry from what they were. But you can buy the modern version of the world's most accurate clock, which is probably the closest thing to one of their older kits that they're making. They do make an interesting antenna called the Pipe Tenna, which is, for those of you HOA people, it's a 2 meter and 440 dual band antenna that just looks like plumbing. So you can kind of hide it. And just for a quick chuckle, my brother Lee, who is heavily into cars and not ham radio, he restores gorgeous old British and German cars, and he's very good at it. He was asking me what was so special about this radio, and the guy wanted to sell it to me so bad that the price kept going down. I kept walking away from him, and he kept giving me a lower and lower price. Some people will refer to this radio as the radio that killed Heathkit, but they're not quite that bad. So I explained to Lee, I said, you found a car. It's in showroom condition. It's got low miles on it. It's from the early 70s, but it's a Pinto.
Hey, I had one of those.
Yeah, I did too. I had a Pinto station wagon for years that I drove my family around in. Hey, Neil, I think what you're referring to is the infamous GC 1000 clocks from the Heathkit. I have several of them that I built, and they work as well today as they did when I built them, 40 years ago. So
there's a modern version of that clock now from Heathkit. But I also, one of the things I look for when I'm poking around eBay or other places is unbuilt vintage kits. And I picked this up recently. This isn't the Heathkit, but this is, it was just called the Giant Clock Kit. And it does work. I'm sorry I don't have it plugged in. It uses a crystal time base, and it does not have a trimmer capacitor in it. So I set it up, I plugged it in, and it gains about 2 seconds a day. That's going to drive me crazy, so I got to figure out which capacitor to replace with a trimmer, and I'm going to try to adjust it. Because the only other way to fix it is to pop the pick chip out and change the number of pulses it's counting. And I don't have a pick programmer currently, and I really don't feel like messing with it. So we'll go with a trimmer. But I bought that clock off of a guy who was selling a bunch of used kits, and its little brother. So when they're finally done, I'm going to mount them to a piece of finished wood, and one of them will be local time, and one of them will be Zulu. So, and that goes on the wall in the shack. Neat stuff.
My first kit was an Allied radio kit. This band spanner.
Allied. I learned as a kid what happened to that company studying my uncle's library in his shack in Norwalk. And I found the catalog from the early 70s where Allied had been bought by Radio Shack, and they had both of the products in one catalog. And what a shame, because I know some of the stuff they sold. I had at one point, I had an amplifier in here, a really gorgeous tube stereo amp that was a kit version of a Scott stereo amplifier that Knight sold. So they kind of licensed it from somebody who made a really good amp. That tells me, good company. It's a shame that they couldn't keep it together. So
We had, you could buy like 3 resistors, 2 capacitors, and a light bulb from them. You just order the stuff and you'd send them money, and if you overpaid, they'd send you a check. And recently we went through my mother's papers after she passed away, and I found a check that was made to me for 9 cents from Allied Radio.
I remember seeing stuff like that coming to my dad, for various things over the years. Yeah, there we go.
That's what it looks like now. And I actually was able to hook this up, build a teletype interface to it, and it hooked it to a VAX 11780 computer, and ran an antenna outside of the company I work for, GE, up here, and it was the time server for all of the General Electric company. That's how I was able to buy it. I didn't pay for it. The company bought it. I built it at home, and so Heath is near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure when I say DX20, many of you are saying, oh, cool.
I've had a few other things in and out of here. I told you I built one of these. I just thought I'd show you the size reference here. This is the Hans Summers QCX Mini. This one is 20 meters. I'm going to be doing another one with the Makers Group, either a 17 or a 60. I have both.
Neil, I'm just curious as what your take on, as you interact with people in this presentation, the clubs, the kit building assistance that you provide and so forth, and your personal experience. When the DX20 was out there, it was probably for me as a kid, the thrill of building it and the affordability of something low cost to get me into the hobby. What do you think the human factors elements are today? Are people inspired to build kits anymore, or is it more of a, hey, you know what, I'm just going to spend the extra few bucks and buy it finished or buy a commercial thing? And where does the whole kit building mindset sit in amateur radio, in your opinion?
I think there's still plenty of people who want to build. I think ham radio attracts people who enjoy stuff like that. And we're not just attracting, 20 and 30-year-olds, which, people are saying you get a lot of people in that age range who stumble on it. We're attracting a lot of retirees, at least in my club, who discovered ham radio during the pandemic, or who had always wanted to do it and didn't, have a chance to do it. Like my case, how I got into it, I tried to be a ham a couple of times over the years, and I just never completed the task. I had other things I was doing. What got me into it was listening to Leo Laporte's This Week in Tech shows, because I'm an IT guy. And when Leo announced that he was starting a ham radio show and getting his own ham license, I'm like, well, hell, I can do that. And 2 weeks later, I took a test and I got my tech. But there are people who are coming to us now are people who build scale models, people who do fly fishing and tie their own flies, people who do woodworking, people who do their own car repair. I have a really good friend I have met through ham radio up here. My own local club did a bang-up job in the pandemic. We have 5 nets on our repeater, 2 daily nets and 3 weeklies. And a lot of it started during the pandemic, and our club grew from about 45 members to 85 members during the pandemic. Now, it helps to have your repeater at about 3,000 feet, but we do a lot of activity. We've had safe gatherings during COVID where we distance, we draw lines on the floor with tape. Everybody has to wear a mask. There's hand sanitizer everywhere. And we do these things outdoors in a pavilion in a park where we have our field day. And we've had a lot of fun with it. We were starting to do things where we build things also. We're going to get more into that. But a lot of the guys that came to us, including the one guy I mentioned, who I've become really good friends with, he is more of like a mechanical type. He works on his own truck. He, fixes his camping trailer. He does all the work on his house. He has the mind for this. So he said, you know something? I want to start playing with this. He says, I can solder. He went online. He bought a broken Yaesu FT991 and fixed it. And this is a guy who's never done this stuff before. So I think a lot of people who have the aptitude for it are flocking to ham radio here and there because they find the technical side of it attractive. One more quick story because you're asking what demographics. Another guy I've become friends with was a ham who came back to the hobby. He hadn't operated in decades, and he's retired. He lives with his very elderly father, who he takes care of, and they're both on fixed income. He doesn't have a ton of cash to spend on radios and antennas. Almost everything he's done has been DIY. He made his own antennas. He made a tuner, and he had an old HF rig that wasn't working well. He went out and he bought one of these Asher Farhan BitX, micro BitX transceivers. He's putting out 10 watts on 75 meters, probably 7 watts on 20. And he's talking to people all over the world because he kept tweaking his antenna. He put up a really good antenna. Then finally he called me and he said, I need to buy a full power HF rig. I'm not going to build one. I want something that's economical, not a ton of, buttons and displays. He said, I want something really simple that has the WARC bands. It puts out 100 watts and is easy to use and has a good reputation. And I told him to look for a Kenwood TS140. I think a very underrated transceiver, stripped down version of the 440. And he found one for about $250, which is a great deal. And he is loving life, talking to people all over the world. But he's asking me, what can I build next? He built one of those QRP SWR power meters that I was talking about. He's built a couple of Pixies. He wanted to build one of the QDXs, but if you know much about the debacle that happened with Hans releasing that product, he released 400 of them available, and they sold out in 12 minutes. But this is what I like to see. And the thing that some of the clubs have done is they've approached local makers groups at the high school and college level and gone in and talked about ham radio and the fact that, no, this isn't, this isn't people sitting around tube rigs with whistles coming out of boxes. It's, we use computers. We're doing digital modes. We're pointing dishes at the moon and bouncing signals back. We're talking over satellites. There is a lot going on here that can really excite people. You should have seen the crowd we had when we were doing the satellite stuff for the Hudson River Relay this summer. We were down at Kingston Point Park, and people were like, "Are you talking to a satellite?" And it was neat to see people get interested. So yeah, I think the excitement can be there, definitely.
Yeah, we do have a presentation coming up next year on satellite communications that I think may get some people excited. Any other questions from Alplas that Jim can facilitate?
Yeah, go ahead. Neil, I got a question for you. A few weeks ago, I got an email from ARRL, and in the email was a offer for a very simple, low-cost kit. It was a VHF receiver, I believe. Maybe someone else has gotten that same email and can talk to it. I was wondering if you were familiar with that kit at all. Because I thought this would be a great kit for a young person like my daughter to build and try to start that bug into radios.
Did you understand the question, Neil?
I think so. So you said a VHF receiver?
Yeah, put out by the ARRL. I just got an email a week or two ago, I think it was.
Well, this is a new one to me. Hold on. I don't think I remember seeing that. No, I got something funny going on with my screen here. I can't get off of it.
Yeah, I don't remember it, but that sounds interesting. It's a receiver or transceiver?
It was a receiver. It was VHF. I think it went up. I think it was like 50 to 200 megahertz. Very simple circuit board. I think it was only $20, something like that. It was a kit.
Okay.
But it was, I got an email from ARRL, and they had a bunch of stuff that they were promoting, and that was one of it, and that one really intrigued me.
Yeah.
So I thought other folks might have been familiar with it as well, and I tried to Google some information, and I really couldn't find any information on it. So interesting.
Let's see. Ulch, no, that's old, 1997. Huh. If anybody has this email, please forward it to me.
Do you happen to still have it?
Oh, I'm sure I do. Oh, yes.
Sure.
I'll forward it to you.
Yeah.
I found it, Neil, in the shop on the ARRL website. Introduction to Radio Receiver Kit.
I just found it.
It's worth $15.
Wow.
So he has to see
Right.
it. Oh, wow.
This is going on the website. Receives approximately 40 through 150 megahertz. You know what this is like? You guys, you remember the Radio Shack police receiver that you built with the spring terminals from back in the 70s? All right. Well, I'm ordering one of these. I think I have an ARRL like gift certificate here someplace that I won as a door prize somewhere.
Doesn't do AM. Is that bad?
It says that value.
Yeah.
Your Burns wanted to be stupid.
So a lot of the simple kits for those bands that say they pick up FM, what they're doing is they're using a trick. They're doing like a wideband AM that's doing slope detection. So that's a workaround. But it could very well be FM. There are definitely a lot of simple FM receivers. Those of you who like just building stuff out of your junk boxes, look around for an FM project called the Radio Shack Special. I think it's a 1 or 2 transistor FM radio that actually performs quite well.
Is this the kit that is being referred to?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it says it'll do aircraft control tower.
They're on AM. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So it must be the slope detection. Do both.
yeah. That's very good.
Neil, it's a wonderful presentation. I have one other question for you.
Sure.
As I get older, the old solder sucker is more and more difficult for me to use, and I've heard that some of these devices have constant suction devices where you just flip a little thing and use the suction. Can you advise us on the best way to remove solder after we've made a mistake?
Well, I mean, there's always the wick, which only does so much, but I've learned that there's definitely different qualities in the solder wick, the braid. But I found, for me, the wick is of good use for cleaning up a solder mistake, but not removing a part.
Mm-hmm.
So it can get you started. All right, 2 answers there. I do not have one of those constant suction desoldering tools. Actually, no, I do. I actually do have one. I don't know if it works. I bought a trunk load of stuff from an old computer shop that was going out of business, and that was one of the things the guy had. But he had a really nice Hitachi scope, and I didn't own a scope at the time, so that was the main thing I was after. But he kept bringing all this other stuff out, including a lot of 50-ohm BNC cables. So I have one. I've tried to use it, and it had this god-awful smell like a mouse had crawled inside of it, and was being roasted. It just didn't. It smelled like something I smell at work in the research animal area. So I got to pop it open and clean it. But no, the one I use regularly, and I'm starting to swear by, and I think you can still get it from Radio Shack online, but I think Weller sells a version of it as well. It's a soldering iron with a slightly larger tip that has a hole in the middle. It's like a pinhole in the middle, and it has a rubber, or it's not rubber, but a silicone bulb. And basically what you do is you compress the bulb, apply the soldering iron to what you want to remove, and then release the bulb, and it sucks the solder in. And that thing has been fantastic. I repaired a Yaesu, oh God, what are their most common HTs there? They made the 5, the 6, and the 7. I can't think of the full model line.
FT65 or FT60?
No, the other line. They made a 5, a 6, and a 7. They're a tri-band. One of them's quad band. Yeah. I think it's here.
The VX5R.
Yeah, here, VX7R.
Yeah, I got one of those.
Yeah, so these radios have a common problem. Common point of failure is that the filters go bad, the filter cans, and it'll become dead on most of the bands. So you can buy the replacements. They're not that expensive. My club had this radio in their pile of we don't know what to do with this. And I said, let me try to fix it. And I bought the filter cans, and I had to desolder and replace the old ones with the new ones. The cans aren't the easiest things to solder because the ground pins, the housing acts like a heat sink. So it's actually pretty hard to get them out. But that thing I bought right around that time. I said, well, maybe this will work. And so since then, it's gotten me out of some jams when I messed things up. And I've desoldered some pretty big components with it, including BNC jack, some variable resistors, things that don't desolder well normally. So that's my favorite.
$25.
Oh, that's great.
There is an improvement. I actually do the same thing, and what I do with that Radio Shack soldering iron with the suction tip on it you're talking about is I remove the silicone bulb, and I just use a little hobby vacuum pump with a foot switch. And the only thing you have to concern yourself with if you do that is you don't want to suck hot solder or bits of solidified solder into the pump. So either put a filter in between those 2 points, or do what I did, which is just take a glass tube and just cut it by whichever method you're most familiar with, and put a rubber plug in each end, and then just use that in the center, and then inside that tube just put a little wavy piece of aluminum, just a small baffle, so there's no direct path for the solder to fly through. Actually, I learned that trick when I was in the Navy and worked in micromin soldering. So I kind of built my own, put that as a filter in line between the pump that I'm talking about and that Radio Shack, that little solution with the soldering iron. And it works fantastic. So you just apply it. You don't have to do the two-hand thing. Now you can just use a single hand, apply it to it. As soon as you get solder melt, just mash the pedal, done.
That's pretty cool. I have a feeling I probably have some used dental equipment in my brother's garage that I could together for that. I'm looking at where Alplas is. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong.
No, that's right. You got it right. It's right on the other side of what's called the Rexford Bridge. So if you follow Route 146 up the hill.
I used to go all through that area when I was in the dental business. I knew all the dentists in the area. Most of them are retired.
Wow. How about that? Any other thoughts, ideas, questions? I think I will definitely check your website, and I'll try to make sure we publish that in the Sarah News for next month, just as a reminder. Because it's a real resource. I mean, we get MPJA and electronics, whatever it is, all electronics catalogs and so forth, and trying to wade through some of that is there's a lot there to wade through. So I think you've done a lot of help in terms of filtering and, selecting maybe the top 10% or so that makes sense to actually invest time in. So plenty of good stuff.
Any other questions from Outlaws or at home for Neil or any conversation?
Okay, well, we're done. Yeah, why don't we thank our speaker one more time, and we'll definitely be.
Thank you. I'll leave you guys with a little trick for browsing allelectronics.com. One of my favorite sites, of course. If you want to keep up with their inventory and not miss something, what you do is, I'm going right to the page here, hold on. If you go up to the top of the web page, once you get to it, there's a thing that says new. Click on that, and it loads all of the new items. And right under where it says new items, once that loads, you can sort by newest. And it'll show you in order the items that they've posted to the website recently. And that is the best way to, if you check it like once a week, you won't miss something fantastic that they brought in, which every now and then they do. Well, they've got solder.
And again, this website is which one?
Allelectronics.com.
Okay.
And they have solder. Neat. Can always use solder. I just bought some at the Handfest yesterday.